Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Faster Masters Rowing Radio, where having a rowing coach only makes you better, and following a program gives you a true pathway to becoming a confident sculler who's respected by your peers. Become the athlete you want to row with. I'm Rebecca Caro, and as ever, I'm joined by Marlene Royal.
Hello, Rebecca, and hello, Faster Masters. Nice to see everybody. We'd like to see more and more, so join in.
Yeah, I think we're on a mission to make this your favorite podcast.
Yes, our week needs you.
That's a nice way of putting it. Yeah. Now, we have, as always, some wonderful sponsors who support us and without whom this show wouldn't be possible. Sculling Gear was founded by Christine Coughlin when she realized that there wasn't a single store where she could get all the things she needed after she'd bought herself a single sculling boat. And so she started one herself. Her top 3 bestsellers are rowing gloves, the Take a Look mirror, and the Squoosh seat cushion. And please mention Rowing Chat when you contact Sculling Gear for any of your sculling boat needs. Our other sponsor is the Rowing Retailers Directory. This is on rowing.chat, and go to the top menu where it says Directory, and we are constantly updating and adding new people all the time. This past 2 weeks, we have had updated listings from 776 BC Clothing, from Allmark One, the event media company out of the UK, Ortec Australia, have new contact details, and Sykes Australia also have new contact details. So that's the sponsors for this week. Now we've got some live watchers as ever. We've got a hello. She says Cece says it's rainy and windy in Whitby.
Whitby looks best in the rain.
Why do you say that?
Because that's what they say about Glasgow, that Glasgow looks best in the rain.
That's only because it's always raining in Glasgow.
Well.
I interviewed someone last week called Peter Haining on my Rowing Chat podcast, and he's Scottish and comes from just north of Glasgow. And he grew up at Loch Lomond Rowing Club. And so I said, so Peter, for the people who don't know, where's Loch Lomond? And he says, well, you know where Glasgow is? And I said, yes. And he goes, it's nowhere near there.
It's like, look everywhere for it, right?
Couldn't find it. Cece says it keeps the tourists away. So for all of the people who are watching live, do tell us where you're coming in from, because we like to know that. And remember that, of course, you can add comments below the live stream that you're watching. If you write something in the comments, we can see it. And so you can ask a question or give us a little follow-up if you like. Now, Marlene and I are committed to improving the sport of masters rowing. And so we invest quite a lot of our own time in doing small things that we hope will contribute to making masters a respected part of the sport, and to make masters rowing more fun for us, but also more inclusive, and to grow the sport overall. So this past week is the segment in the podcast where we talk about what we've been up to. So Marlene, what's your past week hold?
Well, since our last podcast, I was taking part in the Rowing Canada virtual conference as a participant, not as a speaker. And I took the coastal rowing course, which was given by Gwyn Batten, who organizes all the FISA coastal rowing certifications. So this is a certification course. I still have some assignments that I must get done, but that was quite interesting since I didn't know anything about coastal rowing at all before I did this, and how incredibly intense and complex it is was quite interesting. And another course that I took or lecture that I listened to was by a man named James Leath, and he's a mental performance coach, and he had a really good presentation about intentional coaching and how just about the whole kind of circle of the coach athlete trust continuum. And he has a website called Unleash the Athlete and a podcast called Unleash the Athlete. And he was a really dynamic, engaging speaker. So if people like mental performance type stuff, I think he's got some good stuff to listen to. And I also listened to a presentation about how some of the performance coaches in Canada, high performance coaches, are using the Empower Orlock for data and how they apply it in training. So that was really interesting to me because I have a lot of masters athletes who use the Empower Orlock. So I like learning about that stuff so I can be a little bit better at getting data from them. And then I worked along with Rebecca on all of our February content to get that up for Faster Masters. That's a good chunk of our week right there, and getting everything organized and posted for everyone. And
that'll do.
And I think about it. Yeah, it was it. That's my week, right?
So my week, we continued the discussion in New Zealand about the novice masters category and how to introduce a pathway for novices after their first year of rowing before they have to do age group rowing. And there's discussion around having a new masters category for people in their first 3 years of rowing. And I'm also organizing a little scrimmage regatta. There is a local regatta that's held on the lake where I row called the Head of the Harbour. And they're buoy lines. We don't have buoy lanes down on the lake except when there are events. So we asked them if they would delay taking the lanes up. And so there's a February the 14th, there's going to be hopefully some local masters coming over to our club. We'll do 3 races, small boats, 4s and quads, and then 8s. And then we'll all have breakfast together. So I'm very much hoping that will come together, and that will be a thing that we can document in the New Zealand Masters sort of community, so that if people are thinking of doing it themselves, they've got a template they can follow. Try and I suppose pool our knowledge is part of what we're looking at. Now, I also have to show you where I was this morning. So the photo from today, this was taken an hour ago. So this is my women's quad. We had an outing scheduled this morning, and the lady on the right of the photo is Ali. And all week we've been watching these inflatable obstacle course sort of bouncy castle thing, which is moored in a corner of the lake as a sort of summer fun thing for kids to do. And we've been looking at it and going, every time we went past, going, oh, wouldn't it be fun? I'd like to have a go at that. And without telling us until the night before, she said she'd been in touch with the organisers and that, yes, we could just row over there, park our boat on the shoreline, and they'd let us have a go. And
my God, go for a jump. Right?
So on the extreme right-hand end there, you can see a little blue thing just going out of the edge of the picture. That is a massive cushion where you jump off the platform and one of your friends is sitting on the tip of the cushion and you jump into the middle and you have to land bottom first. And as you land, they just fly off into the water.
Oh my God.
And then you have to go sit on the tip and then the next person jumps down. And then there was a swing rope and there were some monkey bars where you had to sort of pull yourself along and all sorts of obstacles that it was kind of really hard to get around, including this little bit that was a little blue bit. It had two little bumps like this, like waves, and they were so slippy. It was absolutely hilarious watching us. I didn't dare run at them. The kids were like running at them and just like sliding off.
Well, and I'm thinking that your lake is a volcanic crater, and it's going to start bubbling at any moment. So my lake is frozen. I can't do that on my lake this morning.
Ain't no bubbles for you.
So.
Now, watching live, we've got hello from Dundas, Ontario. You don't say who you are, but it's beautiful, sunny winter weather here. Very welcome. And then here also from Sherbrooke, Quebec is Tony Tarlow. Glad to be here, but it's an awkward time for me often. Oh, well, happy that, serendipitously, it's not an awkward time for you today. Now, we've got a couple of quick fire things that have come up in conversation with the athletes that we work with this week. And Erg Inspiration is something that Marlene's been talking about to her ladies squad in Pakistan. What did they need to learn?
Oh, well, one of my athletes, she's just like, oh, I just get so depressed when I look at that erg and have to get on it. What should I do? And her training partner said, well, make it fun, listen to a podcast, she's like, I've got my playlist. So I'm starting to really enjoy my time on the erg because, I've got my earbuds on and I'm listening to the music or podcast. And, so we had to give our other teammate, some tips of, I said, give your erg a name, like what we talked about last week. I said, give it a persona, make it a persona, make it something you like to do. That's fun. I said, maybe get a palm tree and put it next to your erg, or, do something that's fun, So we tried to come up with some strategies to get the sort of mental torture element out of the erg and link it to something that you like doing. That was our key message, I think, today.
Yeah, you see, February is a really difficult month. It's definitely coming towards the end of winter, but I know in the UK, I think the snowdrops are coming up, but the daffodils aren't there yet. And you know that winter can just slip back in the blink of an eye, because they had snow last week. Across a lot of the UK. It melted quite fast, but, enough to get some fine snowmen up. But it is tough. And I know it's a short month, but I think you need to have a very robust mental approach.
Yeah, you just have to stick it out, right? You have to stick it out. And it was Groundhog Day, right? Here in North America I thought
it was a movie.
That came afterwards. The tradition came many hundreds of years ago. So the groundhog comes out, the groundhog comes out. If the groundhog sees his shadow, I think it's the 1st of February, or 1st or 2nd now, but if the groundhog sees his shadow, that means that there is going to be 6 more weeks of winter. If the groundhog doesn't see his shadow, that means that that's going to be an early spring. So here's what happened this year. In Pennsylvania, the groundhog saw his shadow, but in Nova Scotia, the groundhog didn't see his shadow. So I'm going to believe the Canadian model instead of the American model on this one, and say, because today I wrote to the president of our rowing club and I said, you know what, winter's almost over. Are we on track for this and that and this and that? I said, winter's over in my mind already.
I like that. I'm sorry about my ignorance. I don't even know what a groundhog is, but it sounds like a very large guinea pig or something.
That's kind of what they're like. They're like gigantic rodents, and they live in tunnels underneath the ground, and they come up. But if you watch, Groundhog Day with Bill Murray, you'll know what the groundhog. That's what the groundhog is. Like a gophers, right? Some people call them gophers, but they're groundhogs.
Oh, gophers.
It's the same.
Ah. Another watcher from Casper, the Windy City in Wyoming. There we go.
We have a lot of wind going on today. Whitby, Wyoming.
One of the fun things about the forward planning is that you can look to possible events. Now, we're caveating here, and a local crew here, I have this on good authority from their coach. He said they want to go do the head of the Yarra, and so he recommended that they bought the Faster Masters crew program because, as he privately said, I haven't got time to write them a program. So this is kind of interesting. We know we have a lot of coaches who listen as well as athletes. So if you're a coach, how are you often expected to write a program? Marlene, do you know how it works in most clubs?
It's very different depending on the level of the club. I think clubs that are probably bigger clubs and have coaches on salaries, so if it's a really, really, developed club, I think with fully paid coaches, usually those coaches will prepare the programs. But if you have a club where you might have a volunteer coach or a part-time coach or a coach that says, I can come out on the water with the boat 3 times a week to work on technique, but that's about all the time they have. They don't have time outside of that to commit to developing a program. I have done over the years a lot of that, and that's one thing where when there's a written program that someone who trusts you has prepared, the coach can take the program and execute it on the water with their crew. So like Faster Masters, there is a developed program. A coach can, if they don't have time and they don't want to go in and research, like, oh my gosh, what do I have to know, and how much this, and how do I break this into phases, and what's right? You can take the program. You can. There's always flexibility to modify things a little bit depending on your schedule, but you have a pretty good solid foundation of what kind of work, the type of workouts you want your crew to be doing, and you can take the workout and execute it. You can give them the workouts. They know the workouts ahead of time, which masters really like to know things ahead of time.
They do.
Because it helps their planning and their time and their energy planning as well as their time planning. So it can make it quite efficient for a coach to have a resource that they can ask a question. Well, my crew, with our crew programs or club programs, the coaches do ask us, well, what do I do this? If you're on our club program, we have every month we have a coaching call. So, and those are very productive with the clubs that we work with.
Someone, a watcher says, yes, but if athletes follow the program, it's a whole other issue. I think you want to say when athletes follow the program.
Yeah. What do you mean? But what do you mean if they follow it? Of course they follow it. That's Jeanette. I think, Jeanette, you don't have your name on your identification today.
I think it depends which channel you're watching in. Sometimes it doesn't show the names.
Right. Sometimes it's YouTube, and this says, because now it says Facebook.
Yeah, that's right. I also think it's to do with your personal settings as to whether you will allow people to see your name if you're not personally connected with them. Anyway.
Maybe.
Now, this is a contentious issue. Rowing in 6s when you're training in an 8. Now, oftentimes coaches will have the crew row in 4s and 6s for drills or for part of the warm-up. And a very long discussion thread was started in the Masters Rowing International Facebook group, which I will share the link in the show notes. And OMG, this was a big issue. A lot of people had to pile in because clearly it was something that really gets a few people's goat, and other people have some very, very firm views. So I'll read what the original post said. When rowing in 6s in an 8, the pair at rest are called upon to set the boat up for the other rowers. My take is to get the most from rowing as 6, the pair at rest should apply positive pressure to ensure the boat's perfectly stable so that those rowing can focus on perfect technique without disruption of an unbalanced boat. My colleague argues that the boat should be allowed to tip a little so that the rowers do not become complacent with a boat that doesn't respond badly to their poor habits or poor stability, etc. This is an open question for opinion, please, says Ian Perkins. Anyway, 124 comments later, and it kind of took me 2 cups of coffee to get to the end.
Really?
I'll let you read all of that. But Marlene, what's your take on rowing in 6s?
Well, first, I think the coach needs to identify what the purpose of the exercise is. And I personally would say if you're rowing by 6s, you want people working in a stable platform. Otherwise, why would you be rowing 6s? I don't really see any other reason to row 6s personally. If you're warming up, why are you warming up by 6s? You're warming people up in a stable platform. Or if you're doing a drill that you want them to give them the best possible option to execute that drill, then keep it as a stable platform. I mean, personally, I don't really see any other reason to row by 6s then. Why not just row by 8s? I mean, the boat can be a little bit heavier. So if you want a little bit of extra resistance, of course, a little extra feedback For the athletes, you could row by sixes, but I would approach it from a stable platform. But one thing I would insist on is that when your pair drops out, have a set way that they hold their oar so that everybody does it the same way. And so that, if they tuck, one person has to scoot up on their slide. So, tuck your oar handle in between your knees and your stomach, and hold it with one hand, so that whatever you do, make sure that it's the same for everybody, and keep it consistent and keep the boat level. Now, the people rowing, that doesn't mean be lazy and don't keep the boat stable. It's not 100% a crutch. It's an assistance, but it doesn't mean that you can just completely ignore what you're doing too. So that's kind of my take on it.
Which is very similar to my own. So the it depends answer, I totally agree with. Why are you doing it? And particularly if it's catch drills, it's really helpful to have a very stable boat if you're trying to teach something new. Now, in the discussion, one of the respondents talked about having a soft set versus a firm set. And I thought this was an interesting distinction, because when you are, there are circumstances when you want the boat to be rock solid. And there are other circumstances where you want the 6 people rowing to know if they have upset the balance. And so to respond to that, I think if you made it clear whether you want a firm set or a soft set, the soft set just gives a little bit of feedback if you haven't quite got it right. And the way to do that is to back up what Marlene was saying about how you hold your oar. When I'm teaching complete beginners in 4s and 6s, I get them to sit at half slide with their hands in front of them and the oar wedged against their knees, so that their handle and their knees are actually touching. In that way, they can tell if they have accidentally raised or lowered their hands, because when people are beginning, they're often reasonably unconscious. Equally, they should have a small amount of upwards pressure on the handle. Now, when you become a more skilled crew and you're rowing in 6s, having your blade flat on the water, and you can sit however you choose, whether it's, leg straight, arm straight or whatever, but that upward pressure on the handle keeps the boat level. That's what you do for a firm set. For a soft set, you just loosen your grip a little and just be very gentle and light with it, so that it can move with the boat. And if the boat tilts a little bit, it moves just a little bit. And so for me, I think that that's absolutely critical, and explaining to the crew why you're doing it and what's required. So the upward pressure on the handle is something that very few people seem to understand, that's how you set the boat when your blades are flat on the water.
Yeah, when you're not like this. So.
I know. It's also your emergency stop. If you need to make an emergency stop, leg straight, arm straight, feather blades, lift the handles up. That's how you stop it. But it's quite interesting how I find people don't translate that little bit of knowledge through into, well, how do we use that in other places? Maybe.
Yeah, but I think that's a good term though. Soft set, hard set. I like that.
I thought that was really cool. Back to our comments. Caroline Robertson was dobbed in for making the remark about whether athletes follow a training plan.
Oh, that's quite all right. We all want you to follow training plans, because training is not exercise. Exercise is not training.
Marlenism, got it? Now, Marlene, you've been doing some work in sports science studies, particularly one that was done in Nova Scotia. So tell us what you've been looking at.
Well, Will Ruth, in the science of rowing, let me just pull this up here. Where's the actual name of the article? Will in the science of rowing, Will Ruth reviewed an article about coaching masters athletes, and the researchers are in Nova Scotia, and we can put the information for that in the show notes. It's Bettina Kalari, and there's a site, Coaching Masters Athletes, and they at the University of Cape Breton in Nova Scotia, and they do an incredible amount of research on masters athletes, coaching masters athletes of all different sports. So in this particular article, I'm just going to read the short little intro blurb that Will wrote in this issue of The Science of Rowing. Researchers analyzed survey responses from 561 masters athletes from swimming, running, rowing, and other individual sports to understand how different amounts of coaching affected their feelings of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So what they're looking at is like, how much coaching does this person get, and how did it influence their autonomy, meaning how there's the autonomy, meaning that they're doing this is self-directed, it's voluntary, they're doing this independently because they want to be doing this. Their level of competence, what's their sense of mastery, like how do they perceive their own competence, and how does the amount of coaching they get influence that? And relatedness, which is your sense of belonging. So how does someone who is receiving more coaching, less coaching, or no coaching perceive their belongingness in the sport? So coached masters athletes reported greater feelings of relatedness, meaning sense of belonging, than non-coached athletes. But they also reported greater frustration in autonomy. So they looked at self-directed. This was kind of curious. Self-directedness, their levels of autonomy and satisfaction were very high, but their levels of frustration was very high, also in the coached group. So we had some takeaways for masters rowers and coaches, how to better engage masters athletes and improve some of their outcomes. And Will Ruth and I had a pretty detailed discussion about this. And I'm just pulling up our chart here. So basically, we're looking at coaching masters athletes and their psychological needs. Are they being met or not met? So what the biggest surprise was to me and to Will was that whether someone is the most coached, like I'll define, like their definition here was the people who got the highest amount of coaching were training like 4 times per week. And 67% of their sessions were coached. So almost 2/3 of their sessions were coached. People who got some coaching were training almost 5 times a week, and 32% of their sessions were coached. So 1/3 of their sessions were coached. The rest were done on their own. And the person who got little or no coaching literally was 3% of their sessions were coached, which meant like once in a blue moon they were getting coaching. So what was interesting is that there was no difference in their perception of their competence or mastery. There was absolutely no difference relative to the amount of coaching that they got. And Will and I were both kind of laughing about this, saying, well, just the mere presence of a coach doesn't mean that you feel like you're doing better in your rowing, right? So because people who have no coaching, in some cases they had a very high sense of competence, as well as some people. And so the coaching didn't have anything to do with that, which I thought was perception of confidence. Okay, now we're not saying what is, we're saying their individual perception. So I thought that was quite interesting. That was really funny. And that was the surprise in the study too. They were like, whoa, wait a minute. So this didn't have an influence. Now, where there were interesting findings were in autonomy. So autonomy, again, remember the definition, psychosocial definition of autonomy here is you're doing this because you want to. it's intentional, it's willing, it's voluntary. So for the coached athletes had the highest level of sense of autonomy, as well as they had the highest level of frustration in autonomy. So what does that mean? Basically what it meant was the people who get coached are obviously, they're very involved. They're doing this because they want to do, they're very involved in it. But there's some level of frustration in this group, perhaps because they're not controlling their environment or the structure of their program and how the sessions or coaching is being delivered 100%. So it's kind of like a little bit more demanding group. You might think of it that way. Like for example, juniors, they talk about comparing juniors to masters. Like the juniors don't expect to have a choice of how their sessions are going to be run. It's very like this.
Right.
The masters expect a little bit more flexibility, maybe a little bit more communication. They want a little bit more control over their training environment and how things are delivered. So that was kind of interesting. So the very, I would say, invested people were also the group that might have a little bit higher level of frustration when it comes to certain types of things, like how is the coaching delivered, compared to, say, self-coached people who are in total control of how their lack of coaching is delivered. Right? They're in total control of their program and how they execute their own program. So those were kind of interesting. And the sense of the term they use is relatedness. So basically, catchword today is inclusiveness and sense of belongingness. So that's what this term relatedness in the psychological needs profile was used as. So the sense of belonging was directly related to how much coaching, because that creates the environment. The environment, and one of the things that came out of the study was the environment and the atmosphere that the coach creates in a master's program is very, very important for the sense of belongingness of the people in the sport. So they feel more invested. They feel they're more part of the sport when they were receiving more coaching than people who received little coaching or no coaching. So we talked about that a fair bit. Like how do you help like people who are not who are self-coached people? We talked a lot about self-coached athletes. How do they develop that sense of belongingness in the sport? And one of the ways we said they join some type of program, even if it's an online program, a membership program. It could be something like Faster Masters. They start to have another level of belonging to a group or a community. Maybe they're doing this through Facebook. Maybe they regularly go to camps so that they have chances to meet other people and get different experiences, versus within the club, when you've got different abilities of people. You've got maybe people who learned how to row in high school and university, and they're still rowing 50 years later. And then you've got somebody they'll just say someone comes in their 50s, and this is the first sport they've ever done, and they're in your program too. So how do you connect all these people so that they have an equal sense of belongingness? And we've talked about this a lot within a club. How do you satisfy the competitive needs with the fitness social needs? And sometimes you have two different programs that have different goals, but then you also want to mix these groups. Like we were saying at the breakfast table, doesn't matter how many years you rowed. At the breakfast table, you're all members of the same club. You're all rowers, right? So
you need kind of fluid edges to the group, don't you? So that people can come and go because that's life, but also some people have commitments, which mean they're not racing this year, or they're not racing for the next couple of months, or whatever. So that's really important. And I think this is actually a big lesson to us in the bigger picture of what are we doing to advance the cause of masters rowing around the world. That actually, this is a really, really big insight. And for people who aren't in a program, don't know what they're missing, but people who are in the program, it's definitely worth checking that they're getting enough satisfaction, vis-a-vis frustration. And I totally understand what you're saying about autonomy. So in business, one of the key drivers of workplace engagement and people's perception of enjoying what they do and feeling that what they do contributes to the greater goal is autonomy. And that is the ability to do the work at your pace and at in your time, that you have some control over when it gets done, so as long as you hit the deadline. And that's really, really different thinking compared with when I first started work, when you were given piecework and to do this, and then when you've done that, come back to me and I'll give you something else to do, rather than saying, here's the big picture and this is your piece in the bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And we can bring this right into rowing. That is how Concept 2 manufactures your oars. That is how Concept 2 works in the factory. Each employee has their role of what they're responsible for in the process of manufacturing an oar. And they've got to have X number of shafts built by such and such a deadline, or X number of blades painted, or X number of blades cut. And if you are an athlete and you work, or employee, and you work in the shop where they build oars, you may work at any hour that you want. You can come in and you can work anytime you want, as long as your component is completed by the time it's got to go to the next stage. And that's why lots of athletes work for Concept 2. So but it works, it's a great model.
So for those people who are interested in reading some of the article and hearing Marlene and Will's discussion, you need to be on the Faster Masters newsletter list. So fastermastersrowing.com/newsletter, and we will send the link out so that you can watch their interview. It's a video interview. Now, Sarah Younger Merrill's listening, and she says, hi from Portland. Where's ME?
Maine.
Was this article sent in Will's newsletter? Yes. I'd like to read it. Thank you. So if you're on our newsletter, Sarah, if you're on Will's newsletter, you will definitely get it, possibly twice. Will's newsletter is a paid for service, the scienceofrowing.com. So you need to be, committed and engaged with him.
This is Science of Rowing. He has a separate newsletter he sends out, but this is a Science of Rowing February issue.
Yeah. And another listener is saying, I wonder if there is a user pays element. Masters paying and the perceived service of coaching that they received compared to juniors who are paying themselves. Yeah, I mean, you value what you pay for is a truism. I've seen it many times when crews have been given free clothing, blazers and, row suits and things. They don't look after them. And we've definitely seen instances where you go into a changing room and there's like kit strewn all over the floor and people, walk all over it. And it's like, well, if you've had to, work hard to pay for that, your attitude might be somewhat different. So I think you value what you pay for, and you have made a choice. So I think there's possibly an element in there, but I don't think that necessarily directly relates to autonomy, competence, and relatedness.
I think in this, that would actually be an interesting study. That's a good topic for a separate study or poll. I think we did talk about that a coaching relationship, a coach-athlete relationship is a professional relationship. I mean, if you are a paying athlete and you're paying a coach for a service, you want something done professionally. I mean, at whatever the level, whatever level your coach is at. But I mean, I do think that is a business relationship. And I think this has taken many, many years in rowing for coaching to be looked at as a product, and I come out of, I wasn't a member of a rowing club for most of my life because I worked in professional schools. I worked at Craftsbury Sculling Center. I worked at Florida Rowing Center, and we made our decisions based on what was good for the program from our client coach, more business decisions and how it relates to quality control. Like, is everybody getting videoed? Are they getting videoed the right amount? Are they, is the feedback, the quality of program, listening to the clients, developing the program. So there is a business relationship, which sometimes, people don't think about this in a club situation, depending what type of club you're at. And if you have a volunteer club, but to some degree, if you're paying for it, coaching is a product. And so it's upon the coach, hopefully, to stimulate communication. That was a big factor. Masters, you need to talk to them. You need to see what they want. What are their goals? How do they learn? And do your best to come up with the formula that works for them. That's your job as a coach. So be creative.
And be creative, totally. And no one size fits all. So understanding that different groups have different kind of psychology, and there are certain things that I've mentioned many times in the past about how to prevent cliques forming, which are generally destructive, in my view, to the smooth running and longevity of a rowing group. But even within that, it's totally understood that there are little subgroups, which might just be 4 friends who like rowing together versus people who are really keen to learn sweep but have never done it, So it's normal, in my view, that a club sort of ebbs and flows with different groups forming and then what's the word? You think of the word.
Deforms. Deforms. I don't know.
Deforms at all. Yeah. Because that's how you keep it fresh and interesting. No 2 rowing seasons really are the same. And part of the opportunity to keep people interested and engaged is to have, little different new challenges that people can take up.
Well, and also if you want, like some clubs have a particular time of the year when a group finishes Learn to Row, and then then they have a club plan, every Saturday and Sunday for the next 4 weeks, the experienced people are going to take 4 inexperienced people out in the 8. And, if you want people to learn how to row better, you expose them to people who row better. And so that is part of the plan at certain clubs, is that then to start integrating it. So it isn't like these are the experienced people, these are the not. If you want to row with them, you want them to row better. So you should expose them to people who row better and give them that experience to learn from. So that's another, way that, and people get to know each other,
it's so important, the social side of masters rowing. Now we're going to just move on to the very last part of today's podcast. Marlene and I have been working on improving what you get when you're a paying customer of Faster Masters. And so I just wanted to run through some of the things that we've been doing that hopefully make the program better and more valuable. So first off, because a lot of people around the world are still in various forms of lockdown or not being able to row on the water, we've changed the program so an erg option is always included alongside water options. So you can pick any training session and it says, if you're on the erg, you do this. If you're in a small boat, do this. If you're in a big boat, do this. And the variations are very clearly set out. So if you know at the moment you're on the erg, don't be put off and thinking that there isn't what's an erg program. There is a program and you can execute it where it makes sense for you in your own personal situation. The second thing we've improved recently are daily workout summaries, so that you can literally log into the website, go and have a look on Tuesday, and it'll say you what Tuesday's session is, so that it's a real quick shortcut for you. The third thing is to reflect the different seasons, particularly in the northern southern hemisphere, and also the different types of events that are available. So, for example, we know the San Diego Crew Classic is coming up as a virtual race, and that's a 1,250 meter event. And so our programs, we have 2 programs always on. One for people who are training towards a 1K event, and one for people who are training towards a 5K event. And we also include the 2K option because we know a few people want to do the Crash Bs. So at this time of year, it's really clear what you choose from the menu. And that's based on your personal goals, the events that you want to do during the year, or whether you just want some base training just to keep fit, that's also included. The fourth thing is we've added more always on reference material. So this is stuff that's always there every single month. I think you know that we change what we publish each month. And so at any one time, you've always got 2 months work program in there, 2 months of land training program, 2 months of technique, 2 months of performance, 2 months of rowing lifestyle, and 2 months of bonus. But over the top of that, we have reference materials in each of those 6 modules, which are always there. And now there are more of those than ever before, including, of course, the Faster 5, which are the 5 fundamentals which form the bedrock of all of our teaching. You need to understand those first before you move into the detail of doing programs. And the last thing is that we are adding from time to time individualized bonuses. This month in February, we're doing force curve analysis. And this is a big investment from our point of view because they are totally individual. You submit your force curve and a little video of you erging so that we can see how you row, and then we give you individual feedback. And as you can understand, with a big program, this is a massive commitment, but we know that it really, really matters to you guys. And so we're making the commitment to you, and obviously we're hoping that you're going to commit back to us. So if you're thinking of joining Faster Masters, those are 5 little things that we've been working on. Right, we've got a little comment back to an earlier topic. Cece says, we were talking about rowing in 6s when you were in an 8. She says, what is your take on people who aren't rowing, leaning forwards over their handle and hanging onto the rigger in front of them? I take it this is a wing rigger. She says, I find it lowers the handle and hurts the set. Yes, it almost certainly does. I've no idea why you would need to hold onto the rigger unless your ability to compress is so limited. Someone shouldn't hit you in the back. You should be able to sit at just a little bit before half slide, a little bit more than half slide. And
well, even if you have to scoot forward, you shouldn't
need to hold the rigger in front of you, like pull yourself up.
Right. I think so.
Yeah.
Maybe some people just think it's more comfortable, or maybe they don't have good flexibility and they're going to slide back, or they're worried about somebody hitting them. If somebody is really, really tall behind them, maybe they're worried about not being far enough. But again, you have to, if you're going to you've got to keep the handle up if you're going to keep the boat level.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
They can do what they want as long as they don't mess things up. How's that for an answer?
I think that's the ultimate caveat. So this has been Faster Masters Rowing Radio for February the 4th. Thank you very much for being with us on the journey. We really want to be your favorite podcast. And so this week, we would love if you could tell one friend about the podcast and invite them to listen in. And remember that you can get onto our mailing list and receive notification of each episode as it publishes. Faster Masters Rowing Radio is the place where having a rowing coach only makes you better. Following a program gives you a true pathway to becoming a confident sculler who's respected by your peers. You become the athlete you want to row with. And spread the word. We very much look forward to seeing you all in the next couple of weeks. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.